"You murdered my son," Margaret screamed as she threw Maya and the children out in the storm, but the waterlogged envelope in Maya's pocket was about to prove that Margaret was the real killer, and the $400 million inheritance was just the beginning. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The rain felt like ice needles against Maya Chen's face as she crouched on the wet pavement, instinctively pulling her 3-year-old triplets closer to her chest. Lightning split the darkening sky above the grand Victorian house that had been her home for the past 4 years. The same house where she'd once felt the first flutter of her baby's kicks, where she'd sung lullabies during countless sleepless nights, where she believed she was building a life that would last forever. "Mama, I'm cold," whispered Lily, her tiny fingers clutching Maya's soaked sweater. Her sister Emma pressed against Maya's other side, while their brother Oliver wrapped his small arms around Maya's neck, his usual chattiness replaced by confused silence. At 3 years old, they were too young to understand why grandmother Margaret had screamed at them to get out and never come back, but old enough to sense that something terrible had shifted in their world. Maya's hands trembled, not from the October chill seeping through her thin clothes, but from the devastating realization that she was truly alone. 27 years old, with 3 toddlers, $17 in her wallet, and nowhere to go. Behind her, she could hear the sharp click of expensive heels on the front porch as Margaret Whitmore stood in the golden glow of the doorway, her silver hair perfectly coiffed despite the chaos she'd just unleashed. "You should have thought about this before you murdered my son," Margaret's voice cut through the storm, each word designed to wound. The accusation hung in the air like poison, even though Maya knew, and the hospital records proved, that David's death had been a tragic accident. A heart defect no one had known about. A morning jog that became his last. But grief had twisted Margaret's love into something cruel and unrecognizable. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of her children's trust, their complete dependence on her to somehow make everything okay. She had no family to call. Her parents had died in a car crash when she was 19, and she'd been too focused on building a life with David to maintain close friendships. The few acquaintances she had were Margaret's friends first, and they'd already chosen their side. A cardboard box of the triplets' belongings sat soggy beside her, toys and clothes now soaked through. Margaret had given her exactly 10 minutes to pack whatever you can carry, before the locks would be changed. 10 minutes to pack up 4 years of memories, 3 little lives, and any hope of the future she'd imagined. But as Maya opened her eyes and looked down at her children's faces, David's eyes staring back at her ×3, along with her own stubborn chin, something fierce and unbreakable stirred in her chest. She had never known her own strength before this moment, had never needed to. David had been the provider, the protector, the one who handled the difficult things while she focused on their babies and her part-time work at the local art gallery. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to her children, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "Mama's going to take care of everything." Lightning flashed again, illuminating something that had fallen from the box, a small waterlogged envelope with her name written in unfamiliar handwriting. Maya picked it up, noticing it was postmarked 3 weeks ago, around the time Margaret had started making comments about cleaning house and dealing with loose ends. Strange that she'd never seen it before. As she slipped the envelope into her jacket pocket, Oliver looked up at her with David's earnest brown eyes. "Are we going on an adventure, Mama?" Maya's heart cracked and mended simultaneously. "Yes, baby," she said, kissing his forehead. "The biggest adventure of our lives." What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the soggy envelope in her pocket contained the key to a truth that would change everything. A truth that Margaret had been hiding since the day David died. A truth worth $400 million. What do you think drives a mother's strength in her darkest moment? Share your thoughts in the comments below about what you believe gives Maya the courage to keep going when everything seems lost. Maya had always been the kind of person who apologized for taking up space, who ordered the cheapest item on the menu even when someone else was paying, who believed that if she just tried hard enough to be perfect, life would reward her kindness. It was this gentle nature that had first drawn David to her at the university library 4 years ago, where she'd been working part-time while studying art history. "You have this way of seeing beauty in everything," he told her on their third date, watching her photograph the way afternoon light fell through his apartment window. "Even in the ordinary things that everyone else walks past." David Whitmore had been everything Maya wasn't: confident where she was cautious, outspoken where she was quiet, born into privilege where she'd grown up in foster care after her parents' death. But somehow their differences had created a perfect balance, like two puzzle pieces that shouldn't fit but did. He'd made her feel worthy of love, worthy of the beautiful life he wanted to build with her. The pregnancy had been a surprise that became a miracle when they discovered triplets. Maya remembered David's face in the ultrasound room, his expression shifting from shock to pure joy as he squeezed her hand. "3 little versions of you to love," he'd whispered, and she'd felt her heart expand in ways she didn't know were possible. But David's mother, Margaret, had never warmed to Maya. From the beginning, she'd made subtle comments about Maya's background, her lack of proper breeding, her unsuitability for someone of David's social standing. Maya had tried everything: cooking Margaret's favorite meals, remembering every birthday and holiday, keeping the house spotless, being the perfect daughter-in-law. Nothing had ever been enough. Now, standing in the doorway of the one shelter that had space available, Maya felt the full weight of how naive she'd been. She'd spent years trying to earn Margaret's love, never realizing that to Margaret, she was nothing more than an obstacle to be removed when the time was right. "We can give you 3 nights, said Rosa Martinez, the shelter coordinator, her kind eyes taking in the triplets clinging to Maya's legs. "After that, you'll need to find other arrangements. We have a waiting list of families." Maya nodded, grateful beyond words. 3 nights felt like a lifetime when an hour ago she'd had nowhere to go. The children's room was small but clean, with bunk beds and a few worn toys scattered on the floor. As she helped the triplets into dry clothes from the emergency clothing donation bin, Maya tried to project calm even as her mind raced. She had a bachelor's degree in art history, not exactly a high-demand field. Her work at the gallery had been part-time, flexible around the children's needs, but barely enough to cover groceries. David had handled all the finances, all the important decisions. She'd been content to let him carry that burden, to focus on creating a warm home and raising their babies. Now that trust felt like a weakness that might destroy them all. "Mama, are we staying here now?" Emma asked, her thumb finding its way to her mouth, a habit she'd outgrown months ago but had returned to since David's death. "Just for a little while, sweetheart," Maya said, helping Oliver into a too-big t-shirt. "Until Mama figures out our next adventure." Lily, always the most observant of the 3, studied Maya's face with those serious brown eyes. "Is Grandmother Margaret coming to say sorry?" The question pierced straight through Maya's carefully maintained composure. How could she explain to a 3-year-old that some people's hearts could turn to stone, that grief could make love disappear entirely? "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes when they're very sad," Maya said carefully. "Grandmother is very sad about Daddy." "But we're sad too," Oliver pointed out with the simple logic of childhood. "And we didn't throw anyone in the rain." Maya pulled him close, breathing in the familiar scent of his hair, Johnson's baby shampoo and something uniquely him. "You're absolutely right, buddy. Being sad isn't an excuse to hurt people." Later that night, after the triplets had finally fallen asleep on the narrow shelter bed, Maya sat in the small bathroom with the mysterious envelope under the flickering fluorescent light. Her hands shook as she carefully opened the water-damaged seal, revealing a single sheet of expensive letterhead. The logo at the top read Ashworth and Associates, estate planning attorneys, and the letter was dated 3 weeks before David's death. Maya's eyes widened as she read the opening lines. "Dear Mrs. Chin Whitmore, we regret to inform you of the passing of your biological grandmother, Eleanor Ashworth, on September 15th. As per the terms of her last will and testament, you have been named as the sole beneficiary of her estate." Maya's breath caught in her throat. Eleanor Ashworth? She'd never heard that name in her life. She read on, each word becoming more impossible than the last. The estate includes liquid assets in the amount of $400 million, as well as properties in New York, California, and Monaco. Mrs. Ashworth's instructions were specific that this inheritance be kept private until such time as you could be located and properly informed. The letter went on to explain that Eleanor Ashworth had been searching for Maya for years, having only recently discovered that her daughter, Maya's mother, had given birth to a child before her death. The private investigator had traced Maya through her marriage records, and the law firm had been in the process of arranging a meeting when Eleanor had suffered a sudden heart attack. Maya read the letter 3 times before the words began to feel real. $400 million. A grandmother she'd never known existed. An inheritance that could change everything. But as she stared at the legal document, a cold realization settled over her. The letter had been addressed to her at Margaret's house, which meant Margaret had known about this for 3 weeks. Had known, and had said nothing. Had let Maya believe she was destitute, had thrown her out anyway, had chosen cruelty even when she knew Maya was about to inherit a fortune that would make the Whitmore family wealth look modest in comparison. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Margaret had said or done before. This wasn't just about grief or dislike. This was calculated, deliberate, and designed to cause maximum harm. Maya folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into her jacket pocket. Tomorrow, she would call the law firm and begin to understand this impossible twist of fate. Tonight, she would hold her sleeping children and make a promise that would reshape their lives forever. Margaret Whitmore thought she had won by casting them into the storm. She had no idea that she had just awakened a strength in Maya that had been dormant for 27 years, and unleashed a power that would soon turn their entire world upside down. The morning sun streaming through the shelter's small window felt like a promise as Maya dialed the number on the law firm's letterhead. Her hands trembled slightly as she waited for someone to answer, the triplets quietly coloring at the small table beside her bed. She'd practiced what she would say a dozen times, but her heart still hammered against her ribs. Ashworth and Associates, this is Catherine speaking. Hello, my name is Maya Chin Whitmore. I received a letter about Eleanor Ashworth's estate. Maya's voice came out smaller than she'd intended. There was a pause, then an intake of breath. Mrs. Chin Whitmore. Oh my goodness, we've been trying to reach you for weeks. Please hold while I connect you to Mr. Ashworth immediately. Within seconds, a warm baritone voice came on the line. Mrs. Chin Whitmore, this is Jonathan Ashworth, Eleanor's nephew and the executor of her estate. We've been extremely concerned about your whereabouts. Are you all right? Maya found herself pouring out the entire story. David's death, Margaret's cruelty, being thrown out with the children, finding the letter in the rain. Jonathan listened without interruption, and when she finished, his silence stretched long enough that she wondered if the call had dropped. Mrs. Chin Whitmore, he finally said, his voice tight with controlled anger, I need you to know that we sent multiple letters to your address over the past 3 weeks, along with attempts to reach you by phone. Someone has been deliberately intercepting our communications. The confirmation of Margaret's betrayal hit Maya like a physical blow. She knew, Maya whispered. She knew about the inheritance when she threw us out. Where are you now? Are you and the children safe? Maya gave him the shelter's address, and Jonathan's response was immediate. I'm sending a car for you within the hour. We need to get this sorted out immediately, and you shouldn't spend another night in uncertain conditions. Mr. Ashworth, is this real? The letter mentioned $400 million, but that seems impossible. Jonathan's chuckle was warm and genuine. Maya, may I call you Maya? Your grandmother was a remarkable woman. She built a tech empire from nothing in the 1980s, long before it was common for women to succeed in that field. She never forgot what it was like to struggle, and she spent years trying to find you after learning about your existence. This inheritance isn't just money, it's her way of making sure you and your children never have to face what she once did. An hour later, Maya found herself in the back of a pristine black car with the triplets, watching the city blur past the tinted windows. The driver, a kind man named Samuel, had arrived with car seats already installed and a bag of snacks for the children. Maya kept touching the business card in her pocket, afraid that this was all some elaborate dream brought on by desperation. The law offices of Ashworth and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming downtown building. As they rode the elevator up, Lily pressed her face to the glass walls, watching the city shrink below them. "Mama, are we going to live in the clouds now?" she asked, and Maya had to smile despite her nerves. "Not quite, sweetheart, but maybe somewhere with a better view." Jonathan Ashworth turned out to be a distinguished man in his 50s with kind eyes and graying temples. His office was elegant but comfortable, with a children's corner that suggested he was accustomed to young visitors. While the triplets settled in with books and toys, Jonathan spread documents across his desk. "Maya, I want you to understand the full scope of what Eleanor left you," he began. "The liquid assets total $412 million. Additionally, there's a penthouse in Manhattan, a vineyard in Napa Valley, and a villa in Monaco. But perhaps most importantly, there are the business holdings, Eleanor's company, Ashworth Innovations, which she wanted you to inherit as well." Maya stared at the papers, the numbers swimming before her eyes. "Mr. Ashworth, I have a degree in art history. I don't know anything about running a business." "Eleanor thought of that too," Jonathan said with a smile. "She's arranged for a board of trustees to manage the business interests until you're ready to take a more active role, if you choose to. Your only obligation is to be yourself, the person she spent years searching for." As Jonathan continued explaining the details, Maya felt a transformation beginning deep in her chest. For years, she defined herself by what she lacked: no parents, no family money, no powerful connections. But Eleanor Ashworth had seen something in her granddaughter's story worth $400 million. Had believed Maya deserved not just security, but power. "There's something else," Jonathan said, his tone shifting. "Eleanor included specific instructions about protecting you from anyone who might try to take advantage of this inheritance. She was particularly concerned about in-laws who might feel entitled to what they saw as family money." Maya's breath caught. She knew about Margaret. "Eleanor researched everyone in your life very thoroughly. She was concerned about Mrs. Whitmore's character. In fact, she included provisions that specifically protect the inheritance from any claims by your late husband's family." A knock on the office door interrupted them. Jonathan's assistant entered with a troubled expression. "Mr. Ashworth, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation. Margaret Whitmore is here with her lawyers. She's demanding to see Mrs. Chin Whitmore immediately." Maya's blood ran cold. How did she know I was here? Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Someone's been watching you. Or us." He stood up, his demeanor shifting from gentle lawyer to protective guardian. "Maya, you don't have to see her. You don't owe her anything." But Maya surprised herself by standing up too, feeling something fierce and new unfurling in her chest. "No, I want to see her. I want to look her in the eye when she realizes what she's done." "Mama." Oliver looked up from his coloring book, sensing the change in atmosphere. Maya knelt down to their level. "Mama needs to talk to some grown-ups for a few minutes. Can you 3 be very good and stay here with Mr. Jonathan?" All 3 nodded solemnly, and Jonathan pressed a button on his desk. "Catherine, please ask Mrs. Martinez to come up from HR. I'd like someone to stay with the children." As they prepared to face Margaret, Jonathan placed a gentle hand on Maya's shoulder. "Remember, you hold all the cards now. She has no power over you anymore." Maya nodded, but as they walked toward the conference room, she couldn't shake the feeling that this confrontation would change everything. Margaret Whitmore had thrown her and the children into the storm, believing she was casting them out forever. She had no idea that the storm had washed them ashore in a place where Maya would finally learn her own worth. The door to the conference room opened, and Maya came face to face with a woman who had tried to destroy her life. Only now, Maya was no longer the powerless young mother who had begged for shelter just 24 hours ago. Now, she was Eleanor Ashworth's granddaughter, and it was time Margaret learned what that meant. Margaret Whitmore sat at the head of the conference table like a queen holding court, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, her navy suit pressed and immaculate. Two expensive-looking lawyers flanked her, their briefcases open and documents spread before them. She looked up when Maya entered, and for just a moment, surprise flickered across her composed features. "Maya," Margaret said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Thank goodness you're safe. When I heard you'd left so suddenly yesterday, I was worried sick. Of course, I immediately began making arrangements to find you and the children." Maya felt Jonathan's steady presence beside her as she took a seat across from Margaret. The contrast wasn't lost on her. 24 hours ago, she'd been on her knees in the rain, begging. Now she sat in a conference room worth more than some people's homes, backed by lawyers whose hourly rate probably exceeded her old monthly salary. Left suddenly? Maya's voice was quieter than she'd intended, but there was steel beneath the softness. "Is that what you're calling it?" One of Margaret's lawyers, a sharp-faced man with calculating eyes, leaned forward. "Mrs. Chin Whitmore, my client has some concerns about your recent associations. We understand you've been in contact with certain individuals who may not have your best interests at heart." Jonathan's laugh was cold. "Gentlemen, perhaps we should establish some ground rules. My client owes you no explanations about her associations, recent or otherwise." "Your client?" Margaret's eyebrows rose. "Maya, surely you don't need legal representation for a simple family discussion. After all, we're here to help you get back on your feet." Maya studied Margaret's face, searching for any sign of the grandmother who had once baked cookies with David, who had taught him piano, who had cried genuine tears at his funeral. That woman seemed to have vanished entirely, replaced by this calculating stranger. "Help me get back on my feet," Maya repeated slowly. "Like you helped yesterday when you threw me and your grandchildren out in the rain?" Margaret's mask slipped for just an instant, revealing something cold and ugly underneath. "You were distraught, dear. Clearly not thinking straight. I thought some time to reflect might help you understand your position better." "And what position is that, exactly?" The second lawyer, a woman with steel-gray hair, slid a document across the table. "Mrs. Chin Whitmore, we've prepared a generous settlement offer. $100,000, plus a trust fund for the children's education, in exchange for your agreement to relocate out of state and minimize contact with the family." Maya stared at the papers without touching them. $100,000. More money than she'd ever seen at once, but now she understood it for what it was. Hush money. Payment to disappear quietly and never ask uncomfortable questions. "You intercepted my mail," Maya said, the words falling into the silence like stones into still water. Margaret's lawyers exchanged glances, but Margaret herself didn't flinch. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Jonathan reached into his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "Mrs. Whitmore, we have postal service records showing multiple pieces of registered mail addressed to Mrs. Chin Whitmore at your residence over the past 3 weeks. Mail that was signed for by someone named M. Whitmore." "I receive a great deal of mail," Margaret said smoothly. "I can hardly be expected to remember every piece." Maya felt something shifting inside her, a transformation as profound as ice cracking under spring sun. For 4 years, she tried to earn this woman's approval, had twisted herself into smaller and smaller shapes to fit Margaret's expectations. She'd accepted criticism, endured subtle insults, allowed herself to be diminished, all because she believed that was what love looked like. But this wasn't love. This was power and control, dressed up in the language of family. "You knew," Maya said, her voice growing stronger. "You knew exactly what those letters contained. You knew I was about to inherit enough money to never need anything from you again. And you threw me out anyway." Margaret's composure finally cracked. "You think money changes what you are? You're still the same little nobody who trapped my son with an unwanted pregnancy." Money can't buy breeding, Maya. It can't buy class. The words hung in the air like a slap, and Maya felt their familiar sting. But this time, something was different. This time, instead of shrinking from the blow, Maya felt herself expanding, growing larger and more solid with each cruel word. "You're right," Maya said quietly. "Money can't buy those things. But it can buy something much more valuable." "And what's that?" Margaret sneered. "Freedom." Maya stood up, and Jonathan rose beside her. Freedom from people who mistake cruelty for strength. Freedom from begging for scraps of approval from someone who is never going to give it. Freedom to raise my children, your son's children, away from the kind of poison that turns grief into hatred. Margaret's face had gone pale, but her lawyer was already moving to damage control. "Mrs. Chin-Whitmore, let's not be hasty. The settlement offer is quite generous, and there are certain tax implications to sudden windfalls that you may not have considered." Jonathan's smile was sharp as a blade. "Gentlemen, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Mrs. Chin-Whitmore isn't here to negotiate a settlement. She's here because your client demanded this meeting. But since you've brought up financial matters, perhaps we should discuss the trust fund that David established for his children, the one that Mrs. Whitmore has been administering since his death." Maya saw Margaret's face change, watched the blood drain from her cheeks. "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything," Jonathan said calmly. "I'm stating facts. David established a $2 million trust for his children's future. The fund has been losing money consistently for 6 months, with large withdrawals marked as administrative fees. My forensic accountants are very interested in those fees." The room fell silent except for the whisper of air conditioning and the distant hum of city traffic. Maya watched Margaret process this new information, watched her realize that her secrets were unraveling as quickly as Maya's power was growing. "Maya," Margaret said, her voice taking on a wheedling tone that Maya had never heard before. "Surely we can work this out as family. The children need stability, continuity. They need their grandmother." For just a moment, Maya felt the old familiar pull, the desperate need to fix things, to smooth over conflict, to make everyone happy. But then she thought of Oliver asking why being sad wasn't an excuse to hurt people. Thought of her children's confused faces in the rain. Thought of Eleanor Ashworth, a woman she'd never met who had loved her enough to ensure she'd never be powerless again. "The children have a mother," Maya said. "That's all they need from this family." She turned to Jonathan, feeling lighter with each word. "I think we're done here." As they moved toward the door, Margaret's voice rose behind them, all pretense of civility finally abandoned. "You think you've won something? You're still nothing, Maya. You'll always be nothing, and everyone will see right through whatever fortune you've stumbled into." Maya paused at the doorway and looked back at the woman who had tried to break her. Margaret sat rigid in her chair, her perfect composure finally shattered, her face twisted with fury and something that might have been fear. "You're wrong about one thing," Maya said softly. "I didn't stumble into this fortune. I inherited it from a woman who built an empire because she understood something you never will, that real power doesn't come from tearing other people down. It comes from lifting them up." As they left Margaret and her lawyers in the conference room, Maya felt the last chains of her old life falling away. She was no longer the frightened young mother who had begged for shelter. She was Eleanor Ashworth's granddaughter, and it was time to learn what that legacy truly meant. 3 days later, Maya stood in the marble foyer of Eleanor Ashworth's Manhattan penthouse, watching her children race through rooms larger than their entire previous home. The space was breathtaking, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, artwork that belonged in museums, and a warmth that spoke of a life fully lived rather than merely displayed. "Mama, look." Emma called from the library, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "There are more books than at the big library." Jonathan emerged from Eleanor's study, carrying a leather-bound photo album. Over the past few days, he'd become more than just a lawyer handling her case. He'd become her guide into a world she'd never known existed, and something deeper was growing between them with each shared conversation and gentle smile. "I found something I think you need to see," he said, settling beside her on the velvet sofa that probably cost more than most people's cars. The album opened to reveal photos spanning decades. Eleanor as a young woman in the 1960s, fierce and determined in a man's world of technology and business. Eleanor in the 1980s, cutting the ribbon at the opening of Ashworth Innovation's first major facility. Eleanor in more recent years, softer but still formidable, surrounded by the charities she supported and the lives she'd touched. But it was the last section that made Maya's breath catch. Page after page of photographs of Maya herself, her high school graduation, her wedding to David, candid shots of her with the triplets at the park. Eleanor had been watching, documenting, caring from a distance for years. "She hired private investigators the moment she learned about you," Jonathan explained softly. "Not to intrude, but to make sure you were safe and happy. She was going to approach you after the children started school, thought that might be less disruptive to your family routine." Maya traced a photo of herself pushing the triplets on swings, taken just months ago. She knew about them? About Oliver, Emma, and Lily. She had names picked out for what she wanted them to call her. Not grandmother. She thought that might be confusing since they already had one. She wanted to be Gigi Eleanor. She had college funds set up for each of them, birthday presents already bought for the next 5 years. Tears blurred Maya's vision. All those years of believing she was alone in the world, and Eleanor had been there, loving her from afar, preparing to step into their lives with open arms and boundless generosity. "Jonathan," Maya whispered, "how did she die?" His hand found hers, strong and warm and reassuring. "Heart attack in her sleep. Peaceful. The doctor said she'd been living on borrowed time for months, but refused to slow down until she could find you." Maya closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of love from a woman she'd never had the chance to meet. But when she opened them again, Jonathan was studying her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. "There's something else," he said, his voice lower than before. "Something I probably should have told you from the beginning." Maya felt a flutter of concern. "What is it?" "Eleanor didn't just research your life, Maya. She researched everyone in it. Including me." "You? But why would she?" Maya stopped as understanding dawned. "You knew her before she died, didn't you?" Jonathan nodded, his thumb tracing gentle circles across her knuckles. "Eleanor Ashworth was more than just a client to me, Maya. She was my mentor, my friend, and the closest thing to family I had after my parents died. When she learned about you, she asked me to handle your case personally. Not just as a lawyer, but as someone who would protect you the way she couldn't." Maya stared at him, seeing their entire relationship in a new light. "So all of this, your kindness, your protection, the way you've been taking care of us, it's because she asked you to?" "It started that way," Jonathan admitted, and Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. "But Maya, somewhere between that first phone call and watching you stand up to Margaret Whitmore, everything changed for me." He turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to frame her face. "Eleanor asked me to protect you, but she didn't ask me to fall in love with you. That happened all on its own." Maya's breath caught. In the chaos of the past few days, she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge the growing attraction between them, the way her heart raced when he smiled, the sense of rightness she felt in his presence. But now, with his confession hanging in the air between them, she couldn't deny what had been building. "Jonathan, Mama." Oliver's voice interrupted from the doorway. "Come see the room with the telescope." Jonathan dropped his hands, stepping back with an expression Maya couldn't quite read. "We should." He started. "Yes," Maya said quickly, grateful for the interruption even as part of her wanted to explore what might have happened next. "The children should see everything." As they followed Oliver through the penthouse, Maya's mind raced. Jonathan's revelation explained so much: his immediate response to her call, his fierce protection during the confrontation with Margaret, the way he seemed to anticipate her needs before she voiced them. But it also raised questions about his motivations, about whether his feelings were real or simply an extension of his promise to Eleanor. The master bedroom took Maya's breath away. Beyond its obvious luxury, it felt like a sanctuary, soft blues and whites, fresh flowers, and French doors opening onto a private terrace. On the nightstand sat a single-framed photo, Eleanor holding a baby Maya didn't recognize, both of them laughing at something off-camera. "That's you," Jonathan said softly. "Eleanor's daughter, your mother, took that picture when you were 6 months old. It's the only photo Eleanor had of the two of you together." Maya picked up the frame with trembling hands. Here was proof of a love that had spanned decades and survived separation, loss, and regret. Eleanor's face in the photo was radiant with joy, and baby Maya was reaching up toward her grandmother's face with chubby fingers. She kept this by her bed every night for the past 27 years. The weight of that devotion, that unwavering love from a woman she'd never known, finally broke something open in Maya's chest. She sank onto the edge of the bed and wept, for Eleanor, for the years they'd lost, for her children who would never know their great-grandmother's fierce love, and for herself, the little girl who had grown up believing she was unwanted when someone had been searching for her all along. Jonathan sat beside her, pulling her into his arms, and Maya let herself sink into his strength. For just a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to let someone care for her the way he seemed to want to build something real with a man who looked at her like she was precious. But as her tears subsided, reality crept back in. Everything was happening so fast, the inheritance, the confrontation with Margaret, these feelings for Jonathan. She was still David's widow, still grieving, still figuring out who she was beyond the roles of wife and mother. How could she trust her emotions when her entire world had been turned upside down? "Jonathan," she whispered against his chest, "I need time to process all of this, to understand what it means." "Of course," he said, but she heard something like disappointment in his voice. "Maya, you don't owe me anything. Eleanor asked me to protect you, not to complicate your life." But as Maya pulled back to look at him, she realized that her life had already been complicated beyond recognition. The question now was whether she was brave enough to embrace the complications that might lead to happiness, or if she would retreat into the safety of solitude she'd always known. "What do you think? Should Maya trust her growing feelings for Jonathan, or is it too soon after such life-changing revelations?" Share your thoughts on second chances and new beginnings in the comments below. The answer to that question would determine not just her future, but the legacy Eleanor had entrusted to her care. 2 weeks later, Maya's newfound peace shattered like glass when she opened her apartment door, the modest place she'd insisted on renting while she figured out her new life, to find a woman she didn't recognize standing in the hallway with a briefcase and a predatory smile. "Maya Chin-Whitmore? I'm Victoria Sterling from Sterling Investigations. I think we need to talk." The woman pushed past Maya into the apartment, her sharp heels clicking against the hardwood floor as she surveyed the space with calculating eyes. Maya's stomach dropped as she realized the triplets were in the living room, building a fort out of couch cushions, completely vulnerable to whatever threat this stranger represented. "I'm sorry, but I didn't invite you in," Maya said, finding her voice. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Victoria laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, I don't think you want me to do that. Not when I have information that could destroy everything you think you've built." Maya's blood ran cold, but she kept her voice steady. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Eleanor Ashworth's inheritance. Jonathan Ashworth's little romance with you. The whole fairy tale. Victoria opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick manila folder. "It's all a lie, sweetie. Every bit of it." "Mama." Lily appeared in the doorway, sensing tension the way children always do. "Who's the lady?" "Just someone who got lost, baby," Maya said, forcing a smile. "Can you go play with Oliver and Emma for a few more minutes?" After Lily disappeared, Maya turned back to Victoria, her protective instincts in overdrive. "Say whatever you came to say and get out." My children don't need to hear this. Victoria spread photographs across Maya's coffee table, images of Jonathan entering and leaving various buildings, meeting with people Maya didn't recognize, embracing a beautiful blonde woman outside what looked like an expensive restaurant. Jonathan Ashworth has been playing a long game with you, Maya. That inheritance? It's real, but it comes with strings you don't know about. Eleanor's will includes a clause that if her heir dies within 2 years of inheriting, the entire fortune goes to her chosen trustee. Victoria's smile was venomous. Care to guess who that trustee is? Maya's knees went weak. That's impossible. Jonathan would never. Wouldn't he? Look at the evidence. He isolated you from everyone else, convinced you to trust only him, made you completely dependent on his guidance. Classic predatory behavior. Victoria tapped one of the photos showing Jonathan with the blonde woman. This is Catherine Morrison, his fiancée of 3 years. Funny how he forgot to mention her, isn't it? The world seemed to tilt around Maya. She gripped the back of a chair, fighting nausea. Why are you telling me this? Because Margaret Whitmore hired me to investigate Jonathan after your little confrontation. She suspected he was manipulating you, and she was right. The old bat might be vindictive, but she genuinely believed she was protecting you from a con man. Maya stared at the photos, her mind reeling. The romantic moments with Jonathan over the past weeks flashed through her memory. His gentle touches, his protective presence, the way he'd looked at her when he said he was falling in love. Had it all been an act? There's more, Victoria continued relentlessly. Eleanor's death wasn't natural. She was slowly poisoned with digitalis over several months. Guess who had access to her daily medications? Stop, Maya whispered, but Victoria pressed on. Jonathan inherited everything from Eleanor originally, before she changed her will to include you. Finding you gave him the perfect solution: marry you, gain control of your inheritance, then ensure you had an unfortunate accident. Your children would be orphans, and as their guardian, he'd control their trust funds too. Maya's legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the couch, surrounded by evidence that seemed to prove her worst fears. The fairy tale had been too good to be true. Of course someone like Jonathan wouldn't genuinely fall for someone like her. She was exactly what Margaret had always said she was: ordinary, easily fooled, unworthy of real love. What do you want? Maya asked numbly. Margaret wants to offer you a way out. Divorce David posthumously through a legal technicality, renounce the inheritance, and she'll ensure you and the children have a modest but secure life. No more danger, no more manipulation. Maya looked at the photos again, particularly the one of Jonathan with the blonde woman. They looked happy together, comfortable in a way that spoke of long intimacy. How could she have been so stupid? How could she have let herself believe that someone like Jonathan could love someone like her? Her phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan. Can't wait to see you tonight. Have something special planned. Victoria saw her looking at the phone. He's probably planning to propose. Marriage would give him legal rights to everything, make the whole con easier to pull off. Maya's heart shattered completely. She thought of her children, innocent and trusting, already growing attached to Jonathan. She thought of Eleanor's love, real and fierce, being perverted into something cruel and calculated. She thought of her own stupid, naive heart that had dared to hope for happiness. I need you to leave, Maya said quietly. I need to think. Don't think too long, Victoria warned, packing up her photos. Men like Jonathan are dangerous when cornered. The longer you wait, the more risk to you and your children. After Victoria left, Maya sat alone in her living room, surrounded by the echoes of laughter from her children playing in the next room. Everything she thought she knew about her new life crumbled around her like a house of cards. The penthouse, the inheritance, Jonathan's love, none of it was real. She was still the same powerless woman who'd been thrown out in the rain, just with fancier lies wrapped around her cage. Her phone rang, Jonathan's name lighting up the screen. Maya stared at it until it went to voicemail, then listened to his warm, loving message with tears streaming down her face. "Hi, beautiful. Just wanted to hear your voice. I know this is all overwhelming, but I want you to know that whatever happens, you're not alone. I'll always be here for you and the kids. Love you." The casual way he said "love you" felt like another knife twist. How many women had he said those words to? How many inheritance scams had he run? How long had he been planning Eleanor's murder? Maya looked toward the children's room, where her babies were playing, innocent of the danger swirling around them. She was their only protection, and she'd almost handed them over to a man who saw them as nothing more than dollar signs. Margaret had been right about her all along. She was naive, easily fooled, unworthy of the fortune Eleanor had left her. But Maya was done being a victim. If Jonathan thought he could manipulate her, use her, and hurt her children, he was about to learn that he'd underestimated the fierce love of a mother protecting her young. She picked up Victoria's business card and dialed the number. It was time to fight back, even if it meant losing everything she thought she'd gained. Her children's safety was worth more than all of Eleanor's money, more than her own broken heart, more than the love that had apparently never been real anyway. The fairy tale was over. Now came the battle for survival. Maya spent 3 sleepless nights avoiding Jonathan's calls and texts, each message more concerned than the last. She'd arranged to meet Victoria at a coffee shop downtown to finalize the plan to expose Jonathan, but as she sat waiting, something nagged at her, a detail that didn't fit with the rest of Victoria's story. Catherine Morrison, Jonathan's alleged fiancée. Maya pulled out her phone and did something she probably should have done from the beginning. She Googled the name. The search results made her blood run cold, but not for the reasons Victoria had intended. Catherine Morrison was indeed connected to Jonathan, as his sister-in-law. The blonde woman in the photos was married to Jonathan's brother Michael, and a deeper search revealed she'd been in the hospital recently, battling breast cancer. The photos Victoria had shown her weren't of romantic dates. They were of Jonathan supporting his family through a medical crisis. Maya's hands shook as she dug deeper, her art history training and research finally kicking in. Victoria Sterling's investigation company didn't exist. The business license was fake. The address led to a vacant office building. Even her LinkedIn profile had been created just weeks ago. "You look troubled." Maya spun around to find Margaret Whitmore sliding into the seat across from her, impeccably dressed as always, but with something different in her expression, something that might have been genuine concern. "Margaret? What are you doing here?" "Cleaning up a mess I created," Margaret said quietly. "Maya, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Victoria Sterling isn't who she claims to be, and I never hired her." Maya's world tilted again. But she said. She lied. About everything. Margaret leaned forward, and Maya was shocked to see tears in the older woman's eyes. "Maya, I may have done terrible things to you out of grief and jealousy, but I would never put my grandchildren in danger. Victoria Sterling is working for someone else entirely." "Then who?" "David's cousin, Marcus Whitmore. He's been the black sheep of the family for years. Gambling debts, failed business ventures, always looking for easy money. When news of your inheritance leaked, he saw an opportunity." Maya's mind raced, connecting dots she'd been too emotionally devastated to see before. So the photos, the claims about Jonathan. All fabricated. Marcus hired Victoria to drive a wedge between you and Jonathan so you'd be isolated and vulnerable. The plan was to seduce you himself, gain your trust, then convince you to invest in his business ventures until your fortune was gone. Maya felt sick. "Why are you telling me this?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment, staring at her perfectly manicured hands. "Because yesterday, Oliver called me." "What?" Maya's heart stopped. "How did he get your number?" "He found an old phone in David's things that still had my contact information. He called to ask if I was still sad, because he wanted to send me a picture he drew to make me feel better." Margaret's voice cracked. "It was a picture of our family, David, you, the children, and me, all holding hands under a rainbow. He said he missed me and wanted to know if I missed him too. Tears began flowing down Margaret's cheeks, and Maya realized she'd never seen the older woman cry before, not even at David's funeral. Maya, when I heard that little boy's voice, so full of love and forgiveness despite what I'd done to his mother, something broke open in me. I realized I'd let grief turn me into someone David would be ashamed of. Someone who hurt the people he loved most. Maya reached across the table and took Margaret's hand, feeling the older woman's shock at the gentle contact. "I've been calling Jonathan for hours, trying to reach you both," Margaret continued. "He's frantic with worry. He thinks you're pulling away because he moved too fast with his feelings. He has no idea about Victoria's lies." "Oh God," Maya whispered, realizing the magnitude of her mistake. "He thinks I don't trust him. He thinks I don't care about him." "Maya, that man loves you. It's written all over his face every time he says your name. And more than that, he loves those children like they're his own. I saw it when he was protecting you in the conference room. The way he looked at you, at them, that's not manipulation. That's real love." Maya's phone buzzed with another text from Jonathan. "Maya, I'm worried about you. Please just let me know you and the kids are safe. Whatever I did wrong, we can talk through it. You don't have to face anything alone." "I have to find him," Maya said, standing abruptly. "I have to explain." "Maya, wait." Margaret's voice stopped her. "There's something else. Victoria Sterling, or whatever her real name is, she's not done. Marcus is desperate, and desperate men do dangerous things. You need to be very careful." As if summoned by her words, Maya's phone rang with an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Maya? This is Catherine Morrison, Jonathan's sister-in-law. You need to get to Jonathan's apartment immediately. Something's wrong." Maya's blood turned to ice. "What do you mean?" "He went home about an hour ago and called to check on me and Mike. He sounded strange, groggy, like he was having trouble focusing. Then the line went dead. We've been trying to call him back, but there's no answer." Maya was already moving toward the door, Margaret close behind her. "Call 911, Maya told Margaret. "Tell them we think someone may have been poisoned." As they raced through the city in Margaret's car, Maya's mind filled with horrible possibilities. If Marcus was desperate enough to fabricate an entire investigation, what else might he be capable of? And if something happened to Jonathan because of her refusal to trust him, because she believed lies over the evidence of her own heart? "He's going to be okay," Margaret said firmly, reading Maya's thoughts. "Jonathan is strong, and we're going to get there in time." Maya closed her eyes and made a promise to herself and to Eleanor's memory. If Jonathan was all right, if they got through this, she would never again let fear and insecurity override love. She would be brave enough to trust in the good things, to believe she deserved happiness, to fight for the life Eleanor had wanted her to have. The life she suddenly realized she wanted for herself, with Jonathan forever. "Drive faster," she whispered, and Margaret pressed the accelerator to the floor. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as she and Margaret burst through the lobby of Jonathan's apartment building. The elevator seemed to crawl upward, each floor taking an eternity. When they finally reached the 15th floor, Maya could hear voices coming from Jonathan's apartment. The door was ajar, which sent ice through her veins. "Should have made this easier on yourself," a man's voice was saying. "Now we have to do this the hard way." Maya motioned for Margaret to stay back and crept toward the door. Through the gap, she could see Jonathan slumped in his living room chair, clearly struggling to stay conscious. A man she didn't recognize, tall, thin, with David's dark hair but cruel eyes, stood over him with a syringe in his hand. "The beauty of digitalis," Marcus Whitmore was saying conversationally, "is that it mimics heart failure so perfectly. Just like dear Aunt Eleanor. Though she took longer to succumb than I'd planned." Maya's blood turned to ice. Eleanor had been murdered. Victoria's lie about Jonathan being the killer had contained a grain of truth, but she'd named the wrong man. "You're Insane, Jonathan managed, his words slurred but his eyes still fierce. Maya will never trust you. She'll see right through. Oh, but she already trusts me, Marcus laughed. Well, she trusts Victoria Sterling, anyway. Amazing what people will believe when you show them doctored photos and feed their insecurities. Maya thinks you're a gold-digging murderer by now. She's probably halfway to renouncing the inheritance to escape the terrible man who manipulated her. Jonathan tried to stand, but collapsed back into the chair. She's smarter than you think. Is she? Because from what I've observed, Maya Chun is exactly what my dear cousin David always said she was. A sweet little nobody who's grateful for any scrap of attention. Easy to control, easier to fool. Maya had heard enough. She pulled out her phone and quickly texted the address to 911, then looked at Margaret. The older woman's face was set in grim determination, and Maya realized that for all her faults, Margaret Whitmore was still David's mother, and she wouldn't let his cousin hurt the people David had loved. On 3, Maya whispered. Margaret nodded. 1, 2, 3. They burst through the door together, Maya heading straight for Marcus while Margaret went to Jonathan. Marcus spun around, the syringe still in his hand, his face cycling through surprise, anger, and calculation. Maya. What a pleasant surprise. I know exactly what you were doing, Maya said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Put the syringe down, Marcus. His expression shifted to something uglier. You don't understand. Jonathan killed Eleanor. I'm protecting you. You killed Eleanor, Maya interrupted, stepping closer. You've been planning this for months, haven't you? Murder your elderly great-aunt, frame Jonathan, manipulate me into trusting you, then steal everything Eleanor worked her entire life to build. Marcus's mask finally slipped completely. Eleanor was a foolish old woman who left billions to someone she'd never even met. You don't deserve that money. You don't even know how to use it properly. And you do. Maya's voice rose. You've never built anything in your life except debt and disappointment. You're exactly the kind of man Eleanor spent her fortune trying to protect people from. Behind Marcus, she could see Margaret helping Jonathan sit up straighter, his color slowly returning as whatever drug Marcus had given him began to wear off. None of that matters now, Marcus said, raising the syringe. You're going to sign papers transferring the inheritance to me, or your boyfriend dies right here. Actually, Jonathan's voice came from behind Marcus, stronger now. I think you'll find that won't be necessary. Marcus spun around just as Jonathan lunged forward, tackling him to the ground. The syringe flew across the room, shattering against the wall. Maya dove for Marcus's legs as he tried to get up, and Margaret, to everyone's surprise, grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the side table and stood over Marcus with it raised like a weapon. Move one muscle, you pathetic excuse for a Whitmore, and I'll show you what happens when someone threatens my family, Margaret said in a voice Maya had never heard before, pure steel wrapped in silk. Sirens wailed outside the building, growing closer by the second. Marcus looked between the three of them, Jonathan rubbing his wrists where he'd apparently been restrained, Maya with her fierce protective stance, and Margaret wielding crystal like a war club, and seemed to realize his game was over. You think you've won? Marcus snarled. Maya will never be one of us. She'll never belong in Eleanor's world. She's still the same little nobody. You're right, Maya said quietly, and everyone, including Marcus, stared at her in surprise. I'll never be one of you. Thank God. She moved closer to Marcus, feeling the power Eleanor had left her flowing through her veins like liquid courage. I'll never be the kind of person who murders elderly relatives for money. I'll never be someone who preys on grief and insecurity to manipulate others. I'll never be the kind of person who sees love as weakness and kindness as opportunity. Maya's voice grew stronger with each word. Eleanor didn't leave me her fortune because she thought I was like you, Marcus. She left it to me because she knew I wasn't. The apartment door burst open as paramedics and police flooded in. As Marcus was handcuffed and led away, he looked back at Maya with pure hatred. "This isn't over," he spat. "Yes, it is," Jonathan said firmly, moving to stand beside Maya. His hand found hers, warm and solid and real. "It's been over since the moment you underestimated her." As the paramedics checked Jonathan over and the police took statements, Maya found herself sitting on Jonathan's couch with his arm around her, Margaret on her other side. The three of them made an unlikely team, but somehow it felt right, like the family David had always wanted them to be. "Maya," Jonathan said softly, "I need you to know that everything I told you about my feelings was true. Whatever lies Marcus and his accomplice told you." "I know," Maya interrupted, turning to face him fully. "I figured it out. I should have trusted you from the beginning, should have trusted my own heart. I'm sorry I doubted you." Jonathan's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "You had every reason to be cautious. Your whole world changed overnight. But Maya, I need you to know, whether you have Eleanor's fortune or not, whether you choose me or not, you are not nobody. You never were." Maya felt tears start to fall, but this time they were tears of relief, of joy, of finally understanding her own worth. "I love you too," she whispered, and kissed him right there in his disrupted living room, with sirens still wailing outside and Margaret pretending not to watch. When they broke apart, Margaret was smiling, the first genuine smile Maya had ever seen from her. "David would be so proud," Margaret said quietly. "Of all of us." And for the first time since this incredible journey began, Maya believed that was absolutely true. 6 months later, Maya stood in the garden of Eleanor's Napa Valley vineyard, watching Oliver, Emma, and Lily chase butterflies through the grapevines while Jonathan and Margaret set up a picnic table under the ancient oak tree. The California sunshine felt warm on her face, but not as warm as the contentment that had settled into her bones. The vineyard had become their weekend retreat, a place where the children could run free and Maya could finally understand what Eleanor had meant about building something that would last. The main house was filled with photos now, Eleanor's pictures from her travels, new family portraits of Maya and the children, and candid shots of their growing life with Jonathan and, surprisingly, Margaret. "Mama, look what I found." Emma ran over with a butterfly perched delicately on her finger, her face glowing with wonder. At nearly 4 years old now, she had David's adventurous spirit and Maya's gentle heart. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Maya said, kneeling down to Emma's level. "What do you think Eleanor would say about your butterfly friend?" Emma considered this seriously. "I think Gigi Eleanor would say butterflies are like families. They start as one thing and then they become something more beautiful." Maya's throat tightened with emotion. The children had taken to calling Eleanor Gigi Eleanor after learning about the name she'd chosen for herself, and somehow it felt right, like she was still with them, still part of their story. "I think you're absolutely right," Maya said, kissing Emma's forehead. Jonathan approached with a glass of wine and that smile that still made Maya's heart skip beats. At 35, he was everything she'd never dared to hope for: patient, kind, brilliant, and completely devoted to her and the children. The engagement ring on her finger caught the light, a simple but perfect band that had belonged to Eleanor. "How's my favorite CEO doing?" he asked, settling beside her on the blanket. Maya laughed, still adjusting to her new role as head of Ashworth Innovations. With Jonathan's guidance and Eleanor's carefully chosen board of directors, she discovered she had a natural talent for the business world, particularly for the company's philanthropic initiatives. Who would have thought that a degree in art history and a lifetime of making everyone else comfortable would translate so perfectly into understanding what communities needed most? "The board approved the scholarship program," Maya said, leaning into Jonathan's warmth. 100 full rides for kids aging out of foster care, just like Eleanor wanted. "She'd be so proud of you," Jonathan said, his voice soft with admiration that still made Maya feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. Margaret approached carrying a tray of sandwiches, her transformation over the past months nothing short of miraculous. Grief counseling had helped her process David's death in healthier ways, and spending time with the grandchildren she'd almost lost had awakened the nurturing side of her that Maya had never been allowed to see. The children are getting hungry, Margaret said, but her tone was fond rather than commanding. Should we call them for lunch? Let them play a little longer, Maya said. They're so happy here. Margaret settled beside them, her own contentment visible in the relaxed line of her shoulders. Maya, I've been thinking about what you said at the trial. Maya nodded. Marcus's trial had been swift and decisive. Eleanor's murder, the attempted poisoning of Jonathan, and the elaborate fraud scheme had earned him a lengthy prison sentence. But it had also given Maya a chance to speak publicly about forgiveness, about choosing love over bitterness, about the difference between justice and revenge. You said that Eleanor's greatest gift wasn't the money. It was showing you that love doesn't require perfection, just commitment to growth. Margaret's voice was thoughtful. I've been trying to live that lesson every day. You're doing beautifully, Maya said, meaning it completely. Margaret would never be perfect, but she was trying, and that effort meant everything. Jonathan's phone buzzed with a text, and he smiled as he read it. Catherine and Mike want to know if we're still on for dinner Sunday. The kids want to show Oliver, Emma, and Lily their new puppy. Maya grinned. Jonathan's family had embraced her and the children with open arms, and Catherine had become one of Maya's closest friends. Her cancer was in remission now, and she'd thrown herself into helping Maya navigate the social expectations that came with sudden wealth. Of course. Though I should warn them that the children have been asking when they can get a puppy of their own. Well, Jonathan said with a mischievous glint in his eyes, our wedding is in 3 months. Maybe that would make a good wedding present for them. Maya's heart swelled as she looked around at their unconventional but perfect family. Margaret was calling the children over for lunch, her laughter mixing with theirs as Lily insisted on showing her every flower she'd picked. Oliver was explaining something very seriously to Emma, his little hands gesturing wildly as he shared whatever profound thought had occurred to him. Jonathan was looking at all of them with such deep contentment that Maya wondered how she'd ever doubted his feelings. I have something for you, Jonathan said, pulling a small wrapped package from his pocket. Jonathan, you don't need to give me presents, Maya protested, though she was already unwrapping it with anticipation. Inside was a simple silver locket, and when she opened it, she found a tiny photo of Eleanor on one side and a picture of David on the other, both of them smiling, both of them looking proud. So they can both be at the wedding, Jonathan explained softly. Maya's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears, the kind that came from finally understanding that she deserved this love, this family, this beautiful complicated life that Eleanor had made possible. I love you, she whispered, kissing him as the children's laughter filled the air around them. I love you too, Jonathan murmured against her lips. All of you. Forever. As they settled down for their picnic lunch, Maya watched her children chatter excitedly about the wedding, about their new school, about the tree house Jonathan was building them. She listened to Margaret share stories about David's childhood that painted him as mischievous and loving and wonderfully human. She felt Jonathan's hand in hers, steady and sure and promising a future she'd never dared to imagine. The rain that had soaked her to the bone 6 months ago felt like a lifetime away. That frightened young mother who'd sat on the pavement with nowhere to go had been transformed, not by money, but by love. By Eleanor's belief in her worth, by Jonathan's patience as she learned to trust, by Margaret's journey toward forgiveness, by her children's endless capacity for joy. Maya had learned the most important lesson of all. She had never been nobody. She had always been worthy of love, worthy of happiness, worthy of the beautiful life she was finally brave enough to claim. Mama, Lily said, settling into Maya's lap with sticky fingers and grass stains on her dress, are we going to live happily ever after now? Maya looked around at her family, chosen and given, flawed and perfect, complicated and wonderful, and smiled with absolute certainty. Yes, sweetheart. We absolutely are. As Maya's incredible journey from heartbreak to happiness concludes, what lesson from her story resonates most with you? Share in the comments below about a time when you discovered your own worth, chose love over fear, or found family in unexpected places. Sometimes our greatest challenges become the doorway to our most beautiful chapters. And in the vineyard where Eleanor Ashworth had once dreamed of the granddaughter she'd never met, for generations of love finally came full circle, proving that some fairy tales are worth fighting for, and that the best ones are the ones we create ourselves. Thank you for joining Maya's journey from desperation to triumph. Her story reminds us that our worth isn't determined by others' opinions, that love requires courage, and that sometimes the storms in our lives wash us toward the shores we were always meant to find. What story of transformation would you like to see next? If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.